I'm Daren Dochterman, and you're listening to The Optical.
Welcome to the first episode of The Optical. I've been wanting to do this podcast for a long time because, god damn it, I love movies. And I also love VFX magazine. It's a magazine about visual effects and all the movie magic that got me so excited about getting into film when I was a kid. So we're going to go back and look at the original issues from 1980 of VFX magazine and take a look at the movies they talked about and the people and the techniques and all of that. We're not just going to talk about effects. We'll certainly cover other areas of the films, but just kind of using that as a framework to go back and talk about this stuff. So in this first episode, we're looking at the first issue of VFX from 1980, which covers Star Trek the Motion Picture and Alien. And we're going to talk about those movies, and we're also going to have on Daren Dochterman, who was the VFX Supervisor on Star Trek the Motion Picture Director's Edition. And we'll also chat about what the heck is an optical anyway. There are so many people that I need to thank for making this podcast possible, and one of them I need to mention right now is VFX Magazine themselves, who helped sponsor this podcast by getting us access to these old out-of-print VFX magazines, and we're very grateful to them for that. Stay tuned for later in the podcast for your opportunity to win a 1-year print subscription to VFX Magazine. But first, to talk about Star Trek the Motion Picture, I have on good friend and noted Star Trek enthusiast, Ron Algar-Watt.
I think by this point I might qualify as an aficionado.
He is the host of several podcasts, including The Post-Atomic Horror, in which he and his co-host Matt Robotham are going through every episode of every Star Trek series ever and turning this experience into a series of incredibly entertaining comedic podcasts and some episode guides as well.
You're not biased in that at all, in that you're a frequent guest and also a collaborator in the iPhone app that we made relating to the show.
No, not at all. And I'm certainly don't have you on because I am in awe of your podcasting prowess and wanted a little crutch to get me started here.
Ooh. Complimenting my prowess. Wasn't he the guy inside the Darth Vader suit?
Yes, David Prowse.
David Prowse, exactly.
Yes. I'm sure we'll be talking about him in the next episode when we talk about The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, I want to come back for that one. You made me talk about the motion picture.
So, why don't we just start at the front of the film here? There's we get into maybe a little bit more action than the rest of the movie has. We have a really cool shot of the Klingon ship models swinging around it in a wide arc and seeing them come up on the V'ger cloud. And
this would be the first appearance of the reimagined Klingons. In the original series, they were just dudes in grease paint and Fu Manchu mustaches. And this is the first time you got the nice forehead ridgy Klingons that we've come to know and love.
Yeah, is that supposed to be like their spines just come up all the way up around the top of their heads and
I'm not sure. I've never actually seen a Klingon skeleton, but that would be a cool thing to see. Because I know, like, when Worf has his shirt off, which isn't often because they have to do this makeup, he's got sort of a spine protruding from his back, as I recall.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about the makeup side of things, but apparently Doug Trumbull, when he took over the effects, there was originally another effects company contracted to do the stuff for Star Trek the Motion Picture, and it was Robert Abel and Associates, and they had come up with a lot of interesting CGI stuff, like really early CGI stuff, and had
CGI in 1979. That's impressive.
Yeah, they had done some commercials with CGI, and they eventually worked on Tron, which I know you haven't seen.
Long running inside joke between the two of us, but no, I have not seen it.
But I think they had been used to working on commercials and maybe bit off a little bit more than they could chew in the time allotted for the effects. So eventually it got passed on to Doug Trumbull and his group, and subcontracted to them was John Dykstra, who had run ILM for the first Star Wars movie, and his group. Apogee, and they worked together on the effects to kind of right down to the wire to get this done on time. I remember reading that it was like only a couple of days before the premiere, they were still splicing effects shots into the movie.
Well, I think overall, just speaking of effects and set design and all that stuff, this was their first real chance to flesh out that world that we mostly had to imagine from, cardboard sets and just cheesy paintings and stuff like that. This was the first time they had a little money and they could actually show off what Klingons look like or what the Enterprise, really looks like and that kind of thing. And
right.
I don't know if he approached it that way because I got the impression he wasn't a big Trek fan. But from the perspective of Trek fans at the time, I imagine this must have just completely blown them away.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why we're getting into San Francisco and getting back to the ship. And we get, this really long, by today's standards, sequence of them. Something's wrong with the transporters, so they have to get over there by a little shuttle pod instead. So Scotty and Kirk are in this little shuttle pod, and it must be, 6 or 7 minutes of them flying around the
It's
Enterprise.
quite long. We watched the director's cut, and I do think that is longer. Like, they do a full 360 around the ship, and then they come back around again.
Yeah. I mean, but it's interesting, because I first saw that only on TV, on VHS tapes or whatever, and the quality is horrible, and you're like, okay, it's the ship, let's get on with it. But then I saw it at the AFI, an actual film print in a theater, and you look at it and it's like, holy crap, there's all this detail that I couldn't see on home video before, and it's actually kind of nice to just sit here and stare at all the detail. You could imagine these Star Trek fans that the show had been off the air for a decade. They're like, wow. Well, yeah, let's sit here and take a look at the Enterprise.
Exactly. Well, and you had even mentioned, you and I just now screened the DVD version. You had mentioned that it's a bit muddled as compared to the Blu-ray as far as a lot of those optical effects, like in the V'ger cloud and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting to see that even with the Blu-ray, I can kind of look at on the projection screen that I have here at home and actually appreciate the detail and the quality that went into it, and it's actually pretty cool to just sit there and stare at some of this almost psychedelic stuff flying over the surface of V'ger. And
now what I really liked as a Star Trek fan and as sort of a sci-fi fan in general was if we're going to talk about V'ger and the way it looked and all that, it looked more alien than I can think of most other Star Trek things ever looking. Like, it's not, you're not just looking at a human being with bumps on his head. This is a weird thing that you've never seen before, and you really get that sense. And
right.
Sometimes I feel like it's sort of elbowing you in the ribs. Hey, sense of wonder. But for the most part, it's actually there. It's actually like, wow, the Enterprise has never encountered anything like this before. What is this?
Right.
And that's cool.
And there's some shots as they're flying, through over the V'ger surface where you have to see this tiny little Enterprise in the corner of the frame, and it's amazing to get that sense of scale. That like, holy crap, this thing is huge. I'm
always a sucker for that when you're in space and you see that the spaceship is just this tiny little blip in the vastness of everything.
Yeah. Well, let's backtrack a little bit. We get to San Francisco, and we've got some really cool matte shots with little model shuttlecraft flying through and all that.
We have a joke on the Post-Atomic Horror, which is that San Francisco is the only city on Earth, because that's the only place we ever go. Like, I think one time in Into Darkness, the one that just came out this past summer,
sure.
They went to London.
Yeah, that's true. And then right off, we're off to the what they call apparently the space office complex, where Kirk is talking to some folks, conniving to get his command of the Enterprise back,
his ship that he loves like a woman.
Yes. And then they get in the shuttle pod and do the whole thing. It starts off, the Enterprise is still being refit. They're kind of like rushing to get things finished so they can launch and get out there and look at this V'ger thing. But it's like in this dry dock area where it's like this intricate lattice work around the Enterprise itself with all these little fiber optic lights. And apparently they had like underneath, they had like a big light and like all these tiny little dental mirrors reflecting little pools of light onto the Enterprise that look like spotlights on it. But once you get out into the blackness of space, there's nothing to reflect off the Enterprise. So the Enterprise should just look black.
Sure.
So an interesting thing that they came up with on this one was like trying to do more self-illumination, to have lights that look like they're actually sourced from lights that were physically on the Enterprise.
Right.
So that the Enterprise could still be lit and look interesting even in the blackness of space when it's not near anything else that's casting light on it.
That makes sense. You gotta have that suspension of disbelief, because otherwise we wouldn't see the ship, and the ship is the cool thing,
Sure. I mean, there are a ton of other movies that just kind of light it, as if there's a sun right nearby. But
right.
I think that was a cool, nod to try and make it a little bit more realistic. And you were saying a little bit more, maybe like 2001, where it's.
Well, that's what I hold as sort of the standard of hard sci-fi, where it's actually they're trying to make an attempt to make it real, make it as plausible to current science as they can, and
which is interesting because that was like a decade before, and what prompted them to go back into doing the movie seemed to be the success of Star Wars, which is kind of big space opera, action, adventure.
Right, roaring engines through the vacuum of space and
right.
Magic, literal magic, and just exactly the opposite of that.
And there was one thing you said at this point in the film while we were watching. You said, this movie looks so 70s. What did you mean by that?
I can't tell if it's just the fact that they're all in the pastel uniforms or if it's the film quality. Something about it just feels very... There was that wave of sci-fi movies in the late 60s, early 70s. Charlton Heston was in a bunch of them. You got the original Planet of the Apes. You got Soylent Green, and there's the third one that I never remember.
Is it Omega Man?
It might be Omega Man, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you got like Silent Running, like you mentioned. You got damn it, the one where they're not allowed to get old, and Logan's Run.
Logan's Run, yeah.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? And I would even put Zardoz in this category, awful as that movie was. There was a wave of science fiction pre-Star Wars. But that had a very distinct look to it, and something about this had that similar look, and maybe it was Trumbull's sort of fingerprint. I don't know. That's
interesting because I think maybe they all had a little bit more of that kind of serious sci-fi vibe, like 2001 did, as opposed to Star Wars that was more action instead of let's kind of think about this interesting concept and kind of play through it, which. There's a lot of thinking and talking in this movie.
Yeah. I am of the belief that those are not mutually exclusive things. I think it's a hard balance to hit. But sure. I know in this episode you're also covering Alien, and I would argue that that's an interesting sci-fi concept that still keeps moving.
Yeah. And then we're introduced to Pierces Gambetta.
Which is a fun name to say.
It is. She plays Ilea, and she's the bald lady in the movie, if you've just seen publicity stills. Apparently there was like a big media event when they cut her hair for the movie. And she was actually pretty nervous and maybe a bit upset about and regretting.
Well, she was a supermodel, if I'm not mistaken, right? She wasn't just an actress. She did a lot of modeling.
I believe she was Miss India.
Right. And so, her hairs are live-ins, man.
And after she had shaved her head, Gene Roddenberry, with all of the care and forethought that he had, gave her a gift of an electric razor.
Oh, the great bird of the galaxy. You are such a sensitive man.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, and I'm not sure who that might be, I think this may be common knowledge, but the character of Ilea, I don't know if you mentioned elsewhere that this was originally supposed to be a TV series, and they ended up chopping up the pilot and I think another script and combining them into a movie when they got the go ahead to do that. But they would sort of redo the character of Ilea and the character of Commander Decker as Counselor Troy and Commander Riker. Yeah. Which is interesting to see the character development here. There's obviously only 2 hours worth versus what those characters would become in Next Gen, where they're basically start out in the same place and then evolve very differently.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see too, where they kind of reuse some stuff for Next Generation. Where there was originally supposed to be a TV show that was going to be called Star Trek Phase 2. There were some scripts. They either had treatment written or they had started writing the scripts for them. And one of the treatments was eventually written into a story by Alan Dean Foster that became the basis for this script.
Yeah, there's a long and sordid history to this project.
There's in the making of book by Susan Sackett. It goes like half the book is about like the whole process from 1969 when it went off the air to actually getting this movie into production. And there's a lot of detail there about that. But also the music here. You know, we get different music here from Jerry Goldsmith that eventually becomes used as the Star Trek The Next Generation theme.
Yeah, and now in retrospect, it feels weird. Like, wait, why are you playing that music? This isn't Picard. What's going on here?
We finally get Disco Bones.
Yay.
DeForest Kelley comes back on board as Dr. McCoy.
Yeah, we're in these bell bottoms, this shirt split down to his navel with his chest hair, and wearing a medallion. Yeah. And this great just hobo beard. And oh, man. Just
that's some great stuff. I'm sad that he lost his beard halfway through the movie.
I want to know, and I know there've been novels and expanded universe stuff written, but I'm not really satisfied. If that's how he looks as a civilian, what does he get up to? You know what I mean? Like, you call him back to duty. This is what he does in his off time. Wow. It's just fascinating to me. He's like the Hugh Hefner of the 23rd century.
The TV series, mentioning that, I just remembered that Douglas Trumbull said that he thought the Enterprise model was too small. Apparently, it was originally spec'd out for the TV series, so it was only 7 feet long. Only 7 feet long. Which sounds huge to me, but he said, you know, on his movie that he directed, Silent Running, the ship was like 26 feet long, and then on 2001, the Discovery was like 54 feet long, I think.
You're getting to the point where it's not even a model anymore. It's just, you're building an actual spaceship. Well, let me ask you, you've seen it both on film, like in a proper theater, and on Blu-ray. Does it look like it should have been more detailed, or were you satisfied?
I was pretty satisfied with it, but I think it was like he wanted to get more, you know, little, they call them greebles.
What is that?
Like, you know, just like little extra junk glued onto it to make it look like there's more going on there. It's not just a flat surface. So we get into the sequence where they're like, the warp engine is maybe not quite up to snuff quite yet. They're trying to get it calibrated, but Kirk wants warp now, which one thing is really cool in the engine room. I guess it's called the engine room, right?
They usually call it engineering, but I imagine the engine room is correct.
That's even better. They've got this big column of glowing, it looks like glowing plasma or something inside this tube. And it was actually a practical light effect that they did on the stage. These two guys had produced some really cool techniques that they were working with. Lights are actually pointing at these drums that they rotate, and on the surface of the drums is all this stuff like crumpled up aluminum foil and colored gels, so it colors the light as it passes through it, and they rotate that, and that kind of creates this weird swirling light effect that actually, I always thought it was a post effect that they had done, you know, after the fact, but no, it was right there on the set. It looked amazing. Yeah,
the engineering set in the series was, you know, some wood panels painted to look like there's buttons on them.
Yeah.
And jumping to this is like, wow, this looks like a real spaceship now. This looks like a thing that could exist.
And they redesigned the corridors inside so that I think Gene Roddenberry described it as Des Moines, Iowa Holiday Inn style corridors that they had in the TV series. But now they've kind of got these like interesting angles, and it looks a little bit more like, you know, maybe like a submarine, kind of giving that quality to it. But if we anyway, back to engineering. Kirk wants warp. Scotty's like, kind of something.
Yeah. Poor Scotty. That's his entire job in this movie, is to tell you that you can't do it and then sigh and do it anyway.
They do it, and it creates a wormhole, which I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but there was a really cool effect that they built with a laser. They had this contraption that would operate the laser and move it around in such a way that it kind of made these like oscilloscope type patterns. And they would, for each frame, they would have it like be drawing this pattern, and the camera would also move backwards during the exposure, so that it would kind of stretch out into this kind of tunnel like effect for each frame. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it looked really cool. And again, I'm trying really hard to look at this movie with the eyes of someone watching it in 1979 because, you know, of course, compared to stuff they can do now, it looked kind of cheesy. But at the time.
Yeah, looking at it from now, it's like, well, this is something we could do in After Effects in 15 minutes or whatever.
Oh, shoot, I could do it in an iMovie.
It took them, you know, weeks and weeks to do this stuff.
Yeah.
There's actually, like, even during that wormhole sequence, they have kind of this weird, smeary, stretchy effect with, like, all the shots on the bridge. And it's like they shot it and then they would, like, you know, take it and kind of mat out a piece that they wanted to smear, and then they would use a motion control camera to, like, move the camera during the exposure to smear it in a certain way. And they did all of these little pieces by hand, and it, like, that whole sequence, just the smearing took somebody like 7 months to do. Oh. And there is one thing at the end of that when they finally get out of the wormhole and they get up close to V'ger, and V'ger starts shooting these electrical things at them. That I mean, part of it was done with, like, a Tesla coil and a ring around it that caught all of the little sparks shooting off of it, so it looked kind of that fuzzy, sparky edge to it.
Yeah, we called it Star Trek's first lens flare.
Yes. But it hits the console and, like, Chekhov screams because it's hit, you know, burned his arm. And apparently during production, it actually burned his arm. They had, you know, like, some solution that would make his, the fabric of his uniform kind of burn and smoke. But they had, you know, some asbestos padding and like tinfoil around his arm to protect him.
Nothing safer than asbestos. That's for darn sure.
Yeah. But apparently it leaked in around the edge, so his screaming wasn't completely acting.
While he's my least favorite character, I don't wish fire upon him.
All right, so they've kind of been flying over the surface of V'ger for a while, which is, you know, some really cool stuff. Like we were saying before, you know, the tiny little Enterprise and this vast landscape that looks like an enormous ship that this thing is built around itself. Mm-hmm. And then we get to this, like, 6-sided iris thing that is really weird. It, like, rotates and compresses in such a way that looks like it's a, you know, like a photographic iris closing, but it's actually when it compresses in that it opens in the center. Mm-hmm. It's this very weird mechanical thing that this guy named Ron Resch designed. And I'll link in the show notes, but there's this like 45-minute documentary about the guy that he, like, just kind of built these weird little mechanical, you know, kind of 3D geometries that interacted in weird ways. And he thought, you know, maybe, like, some of our designs for, you know, just household objects would eventually evolve in this direction. I don't think they really have, but it's still fascinating stuff to watch.
Yeah, and what did his title end up being? Geometrist or something like that?
Yeah, some sort of 3D geometer.
Geometer, that's what it was.
Yeah. So we have this little iris, and Spock decides to go down and give the Vulcan neck pinch to this guy with a fantastic mustache. And, you know, he gets in his little spacesuit, which apparently Doug Trumbull redesigned at the last minute because he thought the ones they had designed for the film looked really silly.
They had some half-decent ones. They didn't use them very often. I can only think of 2 particular instances, but in the third season, I know they used them for the Tholian web. And I thought they looked pretty okay. They could have spruced those up a little. But
the ones that have
these don't look bad either.
The weird little kind of
like a screen door helmet.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a mesh helmet, yeah.
They go through, and there's V'ger's home planet. They kind of projected that onto the sphere, and you know, did flybys of that, and had the giant plaster cast of well, it wasn't giant. It looks giant in the film. It was a regular size plaster cast of Pierce's Kambata and her little doohickey in her neck, the little glowy button thing. And, you know, Spock tries to mind meld with it, and there's all these crazy effects and multiple exposures and stuff going on there that look really amazing.
Yeah, they do.
You know, there's something I should mention about the little button, the lighted button that she has on her neck when she's the Ilia probe. Mm-hmm. It's a, you know, robot replication of Ilia. Well, you know, obviously this is back before they had lots of LEDs and stuff like that.
This is back before they had robot replication of leading actresses. Right.
But, you know, we have, like, really tiny, cool sources of light now.
Oh, yeah.
But back then, you know, that was a big incandescent light bulb that they stuck on her neck.
Whoa.
So she's got a power pack on her back with these tiny little thin wires that go down her neck and connect to the light bulb, and there's like wires that go down another arm that connect to an on and off switch. And
where do they hide this stuff? She's wearing this almost sheer white nightie.
Yeah. Well, apparently it's this tiny, thin, they call them just hair wires. They're just super, super thin. They put makeup on top of them, and it just kind of disappears. But she turned it off between each take, but it still was like, this hot little light bulb on her neck, and eventually gave her a little tan mark on her neck.
The suffering that poor woman went through.
She has to burst through the door of the medical scanning room. Apparently they built like 8 of these doors that it was like kind of scored down the center, and it's cardboard painted to look like it's metal with, tin foil on one side. And so they made 8 of them, and she went through every single one of them before they got the best take. Like some of them would be too easy. She'd just walk right through. Some of them she'd hack away and it would never open. And
so she's ramming her face into this wall repeatedly. God, poor woman.
I think it was at this point we had kind of like come to the point where we're like, yes, we know where this conversation is going, that we started focusing on Uhura's earpiece. And I remember reading that that is the only piece of prop or anything from the original series that made its way into the movie. And that only because kind of everybody forgot about it until Nichelle Nichols' first day on the set. And she's like, "Where's my earpiece?" And they're like, crap. And they ran into the archives and picked her old earpiece out of a box. And here you go.
Cleaned it off, I hope.
Yeah, one would hope. Man, that's been in her ear for like 20 years now.
Yeah, jeez. What I am amazed by, and I could be wrong, but I've never seen one, is how come there is no Bluetooth headset that looks like Uhura's earpiece? That seems like a wasted opportunity.
Wow, you would think there would be.
Yeah.
There was one that looked like the old school communicator with a flip top, right? But
right.
There should be out there somewhere.
That one's free. You go ahead.
If I find one, I'll put it in the show notes.
Oh, very good.
You can buy it and I'll get a kickback. So they eventually, come to some sort of agreement. Like, well, okay, we'll actually take you to V'ger itself. But they walk down into, it's kind of like this bowl-like structure with all sorts of computery bits and stuff. And they see that it's actually Voyager 6, which I don't think ever actually existed. Mm-hmm. Apparently, they were actually trying to get this kind of backup model that JPL had. When they had been working on the designs for the actual Voyager spacecraft.
Oh, cool.
And it didn't quite work out because they thought, maybe it might get damaged somehow on the set. Somebody would be careless, and with talk of perhaps someone getting almost electrocuted on that set. That might have been true. That and they had a similar lighting to the warp core on there, the reflective drums and all of that underneath the set. So it kind of, you'd have the gentle blue lights or the angry red lights, as Richard gets upset. And those were like 10,000 watt lights, and apparently, the UV output from those lights gave some of the lighting guys suntans just working on this stuff. So it didn't seem like maybe the safest environment.
Right.
But they get down there and talk to V'ger, and turns out, well, it needs the old NASA code so it can finally dump out its information, and wants the creator to actually come and input it itself. Mm-hmm. And Decker volunteers. He wants to do this. This is which I feel came from out of nowhere story wise. Like, why this guy? I don't know. It would have made more sense for Spock to do it, honestly, and not that I wanted Spock to leave, but I think part of it was that I think maybe that's why they had been setting up that there was obviously a romantic involvement between him and Leah early on, and he's kind of been giving her doe eyes even since she became the Ilia probe, and she's not really Ilia anymore. So it was, maybe he's just so much in love with her that's like, this is the only way I can be with her now. I'll be, volunteer to be digitized.
That's noble, I guess.
But they did this sequence where it's like kind of this ascension transformation sequence where they get digitized and kind of, come together into this singular entity of V'ger and Ilea probe and Decker. And they have, this like wind coming up, and they've got these giant xenon like aircraft landing lights behind him that are just amazingly bright. And Pierce's Kambata is trying not to blink as the Ilea probe because she's a robot. Why does she need to blink? And so, she's in the scene with him, and Decker's backlit, and she's like staring into this light and got retina damage for a few days. So,
even more.
Yes. So she is the true hero of this.
Yeah, no
story.
kidding.
But I think it all comes back to the machine trying to find its creator, trying to tie that back into the human condition, which is, as you
there's
said,
really
Star
no
Trek keeps
more
coming
Star
back to
Trek
that.
thing you could do than something learning that being human is the best thing of all, because humans are great. Yay, humans.
Yeah.
I feel like while it's not the strongest movie, it does definitely have its charms, but I don't know. Gene had this idea that drama has no conflict, and I don't know how he managed so long in Hollywood with this notion that all the characters get along and nothing gets in their way and everything is great. That's not how drama works, Mr. Roddenberry.
Well, I think he was trying to do it so that internally the characters on the ship got along, and it was always an external element to the conflict.
Right, but V'ger isn't really that. I mean, it ends up being a big misunderstanding.
Right, and even at the end, when it's like V'ger is gonna maybe digitize the whole planet just to find the creator. I don't know. It never felt like a real threat, because we know how good Kirk is at talking computers out of things. So
yeah, and that's another thing. He should have defeated it by outsmarting it, by sending it into a logic loop and making it explode. That's how Kirk works. No, it's like I say, it's not a bad movie at all, and all this visual stuff in it is pretty great. And definitely worth looking at on Blu-ray. I'm curious to see all the stuff that I can't see in my version.
And it's maybe just with the story, we've just kind of become so cynical and jaded with constant action with newer movies that maybe with these older, slower stories, we don't have as much patience for it. I know with like 2001. It is held up as like the holy grail of science fiction movies of a certain era. And I have tried to watch it so many times, and I feel bad that I don't love it.
Don't you feel like must be something wrong with you? I feel that way about certain classic movies, not that one, but certain classic movies are just like, everyone else likes this and everyone else thinks this is something I'm supposed to like, and I don't like it. What is wrong with me? What am I not seeing here?
That's exactly how I feel.
But on the other hand,
I keep trying it, but
2001 is one of my favorite movies, and I have zero attention span. I don't find that movie slow until the very end, the light tripping scene.
How is that even possible?
I don't know what to tell you. I think the slowness and the deliberateness in that has to do with the way space actually would be. I think it's because it's so realish. You know what I mean? Like, it would take you like a full minute to get across a room if you're slowly working, in weightlessness, or you don't understand what I mean? Like,
right.
All the slowness felt intentional to drum home the point that space is not this big actiony place. It's actually very slow and tedious.
Right. Which is, I don't know. I like other Kubrick movies as well that are, very deliberately paced and almost trance-like in some places. But I don't know. For some reason, that one, I don't know. Maybe I've just been infected by Star Wars too much and expect action and adventure and explosions. And
I don't think, well, first of all, I don't think that that's true. Second of all, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can have a very ponderous, thought-provoking, high-concept sci-fi movie and also have explosions. Like I said, Alien kind of fits in that category for me. Where it still feels like an old school sci-fi movie with some interesting concepts in it that aren't even completely explored. There's a lot of mystery still in that movie, which I like.
Yeah.
But it also has some action.
That's true.
I think it's possible to do both. Like, while Star Trek is about the human condition and blah, 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 whatever. Their guy was with ray guns. We want to see something go pew pew at some point.
Exactly. Well, we will get to some more pew pew in just a little bit, talking about Alien. But first, let's talk to Daren Dochterman, who was the VFX supervisor for the director's edition of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And maybe we can get some more answers from him. Thanks for being on, Al.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
With me here is Daren Dochterman, who was a visual effects supervisor on Star Trek: The Motion Picture Director's Edition. Is that right?
That's correct. How are you, Mark?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
So what does the job of visual effects supervisor entail?
Well, usually it entails basically being responsible for the delivery and concept of visual effects shots in a project. On Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I was basically employed by Robert Wise Productions, and Robert Wise, the director, and basically with myself and my two other partners in the project, David Fine and Michael Mattasino, we divvied up the responsibilities of producing the director's edition of Star Trek: The Motion Picture that was released back in 2001. And my responsibilities fell on, being the visual effects supervisor and basically planning out and producing the visual effects shots.
Okay. From what I've heard, there wasn't a lot of time to get once the visual effects shots were getting in kind of down to the wire on the original release, that there wasn't a lot of time to go back and kind of trim and see where things stood.
There was no time on the original release. It was originally going to be released on December 7th, 1979, and it was, and that was a drop-dead date, and there was no wiggle room anywhere because exhibitors had already signed and agreed to show it then, and the head of the studio, Paramount at the time, said that there will be Star Trek: The Motion Picture in theaters on December 7th, even if we have to put in blank leader.
Wow.
So it was drop dead, and various problems that the original company had in delivering visual effects in a timely manner.
Right.
They were let go, and Doug Trumbull and John Dykstra were brought in to basically do the film in a very short space of time, about, I believe it was 8 to 9 months to deliver all of the effects shots for the film.
Wow.
And, after a year had been spent with this other company.
Wow.
So they were getting in shots at the very last minute. And honestly, on some of them, the shots, the space allotted in the cut for the shots themselves were to the frame, and there was no editing done to the shots as they come in. So if you look at the theatrical edition, you can see that there are some shots that have 2 or 3 frames of basically still, and then the shot starts. So they were from beginning frame to ending frame, just popped into the release negative, and that was it. There was no finessing at all. There wasn't even trimming. So it was, there was no, no cut. There was no preview screenings at all, so they could adjust the timing of anything. So it was just drop dead delivery.
Holy cow.
And the music itself, the music was being recorded 6 days before the release.
Whoa.
6 days. So yeah, it was it was down to the wire. So the impetus of doing the director's edition was to give Robert Wise his standard 2 months extra post-production that he should have had back in 79 that he couldn't. So that's basically how it was treated. We used the original storyboards and the original planning where we could to continue where it would have been in 79.
Wow. How did you get involved with this? Because your credits list seems to indicate that you're you're much more focused on illustration usually.
Well, yeah, I worked in the industry more or less for 25 years doing concept illustration and, set sketching and storyboards early on in my career. So that's basically what I've done and what I had been doing previously to the motion picture. Mm-hmm. I had worked in visual effects capacity on several movies doing storyboards and working with the effects department. So I had previous experience in that realm. But when I got involved with Dave Fine and Michael Matessino, who had previously worked with Robert Wise on the Sound of Music DVD, and they had a previous relation with him, and I had worked with them on the Alien Legacy documentary and the Alien discs. I knew them, and they knew what a huge Star Trek fan I was, and I was very insistent when they mentioned that there might be a possibility of doing the Star Trek The Motion Picture Project. I was with them all the way, and we went to Robert Wise and talked to him about the project. He didn't want to talk about it, actually, at first.
Oh?
Because for pretty much 18 years after the release, he was very down on the project because he didn't have a good experience the first time around because of the scheduling and the rush of everything. He was, basically dropped in on this project at relatively last minute and was trusted with finishing this project that had been in development for years and years, and they...
Oh, as the TV series?
Well, it was going to be a TV series on the new Paramount network that they didn't get around to until the late 80s.
Right.
And it went through a lot of development. The original script was originally one of the scripts for the abandoned Phase 2 TV series. So, and plus there were 2 theatrical productions.
Oh, really?
Two movie projects that went through various stages of development that didn't go through. And remember, all of the budgetary costs from all of those projects went immediately, day one, into the cost on Star Trek The Motion Picture. So all of that previous development work was figured in before they shot a frame of film. So immediately, day one, he was, behind schedule and over budget.
Wow.
So I got a long way around on that one. I got involved with Dave Fine and Mike Matessino and helped them, pitch our involvement of the project to Robert Wise, and then assisted him in pitching the idea to the studio. And, about a year and a half later, the studio finally said yes.
Oh, that's very cool. You finally got to go back and do some of the stuff that was originally storyboarded, but that didn't have time to make it into the film?
Yeah, and to basically give Robert Wise his director's cut that he never got. We were lucky enough to screen the film with him at the Directors Guild on the 20th anniversary of the release of the film. We showed it to him in the lovely theater at the DGA, and he was very jazzed about it. And he was saying, I think we can do something with this. So there are a lot of very subtle changes that only the crazy fans would notice in the cut itself.
Right.
But, I have to say that in looking at it and being one of those crazy fans myself before this happened, I think changes that work best in it are the ones that just make the movie flow so much better than it did before, in my opinion.
So which shots are what were you most proud of, I guess?
Well, you know what? I'm proud of all the shots that no one notices, basically. I'm very glad that we were able to build a CG USS Enterprise model that we were able to light correctly and have it play next to other shots of the physical Enterprise, and people don't notice that they're there.
Oh, very nice.
That was very exciting, and I'm very proud of that aspect. We had what was then Foundation Imaging, which was a great effects company who did a lot of work on the later Star Trek series and did Babylon 5 and those things. And we had a great small little rogue team in Foundation Imaging who was doing the bulk of our CG shots. And they did an absolutely wonderful job in getting the tone and the look of the original footage, goosing it up just a little bit to make things work better with the timings and all that sort of things. But I'm very happy that there were, I think, three or four major sequences in it that we readdressed. One was the Vulcan sequence at the beginning with Spock and the Vulcan Masters in the Vulcan Temple of Kolinar. And that was replacing a few shots that were previously painted by Matt Jurisic under under very short time constraint and duress. And the great paintings that he had done, which were much more brightly lit and really looked gorgeous. There's a couple of behind-the-scenes shots of that are completely different than what were shown in the original theatrical release. But we went back to the style of those and made more of a daytime Vulcan setting.
Right, because it seemed in the Vulcan shots in the original release, there's Spock kind of looking up at the sun and shielding his eyes from it with his hand, and then we
cut to the reverse shot and we see, well, it's basically black space and two moon-like objects up there.
Right.
Yeah, that was very, very odd. And shielding his eyes from what again? So the Vulcan sequence was a good one, and we also did some reworking of the San Francisco sequence right after that.
Right.
And with several new establishing shots of San Francisco, and basically the wing walk sequence at the end, where our crew members walk on the surface of the Enterprise and then walk across the magical tetrahedron or dodecahedron platforms that V'ger presents to them to go to the V'ger Island.
Right. It seemed like there was a lot more of that in the original cut, and then in the director's edition, there were very small, thin, kind of little roads made of that Giant's Causeway kind of looking.
Yeah,
stuff.
In the original release, it was always intended to be these small walkways that V'ger set up for them. As it is in the theatrical edition, it looks like the Enterprise pulls up to a loading dock. Basically, there's all these things up there. But in the original planning, V'ger Island was alone in this opening in the ship, and then it created the bridge out to them so that they could walk across. And that, to me, that's much more dramatic and a dynamic thing to happen. So that actually was very well storyboarded, and we had those, and we followed those almost to the letter.
And there was one other large shot that I noticed that I guess it wasn't that long, but it was you finally saw the whole of the V'ger ship, which you never quite saw in the original.
Yeah. We have the V'ger reveal where the cloud dissipates and we see it over Earth. And, that was something that was always planned, but they never really got around to realizing it. Mostly because the V'ger actually never existed as one whole unit. The size that was necessary for shooting the miniatures at Apogee, John Dykstra's company, each section of the miniature were about 30 to 40 feet long. And none of them were ready at the same time. They were working on one section, and when they finished that, they'd work on the second section and shoot on the first section. Oh, wow. So none of it existed together, and if it had, it would have been probably around 100 feet long.
Holy
so,
cow.
There's, I think there are very few, if any, sound stages where you could get a camera that far back to get the whole thing into one shot. So we had several production paintings that show the V'ger reveal, and we were able to, with Mr. Wise's judgment, he picked the best one out of that to show both the size and scale of V'ger and let us see what we've been flying around for the past half hour.
That's great. Were there any shots that you had a real tough time with, kind of getting into the director's edition, or wish that you could have completed differently?
Well, there's a couple little things. I mean, the one that I got the most flack for was the officer's lounge scene, where we show the engines outside the windows. And first of all, that was originally planned to be a much grander lounge in the back. And when they got around to shoot it on stage, they basically had no money left for stages, so they took some flats that were in the recreation deck and set them up and put those orange couches in front of them and then called it a day. Andy Probert, one of the original production illustrators on the movie, had designed this great lounge that was basically behind the bridge section on a couple decks below the bridge, and it has these huge windows that look out onto the surface of the ship, and we see the nacelles back there. But at that point, when we were working on the director's edition, there was really no way to efficiently and quickly rotoscope the actors away from the standing flats that were there and isolate them enough. So we, like the original production, had to compromise a little bit, and we just tried to put the engines out the window in the best place that we could figure out. It doesn't really line up with the windows in the back of the ship, and that's sort of one of those things that you have to just do your best with and work with the limitations that you have.
Sure.
So if I had it to do again today, I would allot 3 months for rotoscope work on that and basically replace the whole back of the shot with a version of the officer's lounge that actually corresponds to the exterior of the ship. And that would be nice to do.
Yeah, I saw that concept on your blog. That's really nice.
I played around with it. I'm only able to do a still of it because of all that complicated roto work. And Dr. McCoy doesn't really make things any easier with the amount of flap that his pant legs do. So, but, that said, these days it is at least easier, if not quicker.
Sure. I still think the shot came out really well. It's nice to see that kind of relationship to the, the outside and the rest of the ship there.
That's one of the edicts that Mr. Wise gave us at the beginning. He didn't want to lose the scope of the movie. So, one of the ways that they tried to in the original shooting of it was to try wherever they could to relate the interiors with the exteriors. There is a backing painting in the rec deck that you can barely see in the recreation room scenes that show the exterior of the ship. But when they came around to finalizing those shots, they realized, well, our version of the ship now doesn't look like what it did in the painting, so they had to hide it as much as they could.
Oh.
That's one of the problems with having on-set existing backings like that, where you're relying on the design of visual effects that won't occur for another year or a year and a half later.
Huh. So when you did this director's edition, were the shots completed at film resolution? Because there doesn't seem to be a Blu-ray version output yet, but maybe they just haven't gotten to it.
There is not. Well, we tried. Our proposal included a film res finaling of the director's edition and the ability to go back to a film negative. The studio, for their reasons, did not want to hear that. And because we were working through the home entertainment division, they were only interested in the project being released on DVD, and so they were not interested in funding anything past that. So we were limited to outputting at digibeta resolution, which is I think 720 by 480. So that's how it exists. I mean, we planned everything to go at film res. All the models were built to hold up to that, and we wanted to, but one of the things you have to work with is your budget, and we just did not have the budget to render any of the stuff out at film res. But that's just how it goes.
Sure. Has there been any talk of revisiting that for a new Blu-ray edition?
From the people who would actually pay for it? Not that I know of. There certainly is a lot of interest in the fan community for it, and I think every 4 or 5 days or so, I get a message from someone saying, hey, has there been any talk about a Blu-ray of the director's edition? And, I haven't gotten to the point where I send out a form letter yet, but the answer is I would love to do it. I would love to have the studio come to us and say, hey, we'd like you to do this. It's harder now to use the older effects setups that we did because the software has moved on and a lot of things are not compatible anymore.
Right.
But it is possible. We certainly can, recreate stuff if we need to. It would have been a lot easier, 10 years ago. I wish they had come around then, but
sure.
That's business.
Fair enough. But you have done some other stuff that is Star Trek related. You've, I understand, worked on some of the Star Trek New Voyages, which I also called Phase 2. I'm a little confused about the title there.
Well, Star Trek New Voyages started about 12 years ago, something like that. Well, almost 10, actually, as a fan production that, just these guys in upstate New York set up some Star Trek sets and just started making Star Trek.
All right.
Then years later, they decided to move on and change the name to Phase 2.
Oh, I see.
Based on the planned but abandoned Phase 2 series that Paramount was going to do.
Right.
They contacted me, what was it, about maybe 6 years ago? James Cawley, who runs the whole thing, and his, one of the hugest Star Trek fans I've ever met, and really fun guy. He basically started this because he wanted to play Captain Kirk and play Star Trek with his friends. And, I don't blame him. That's a fun thing to do.
That sounds like great fun.
It is. I looked at their first couple of shows, and you know what? The energy and enthusiasm was unmatched. And I've talked with him about it, and it does have that high school play quality to it. Mm-hmm. And, that's understandable. I mean, there weren't any, real trained actors in it, and it was mostly done for fun. The funny thing is that everything else in the production was so top-notch that there was a little bit of a disconnect that, man, if they could do this with other actors or, more trained actors,
sure,
this would be awesome.
I understand you've done some acting on that as well.
A little bit, just for fun. I wrote that review up on my blog back a few years ago, mm-hmm, and James Cawley actually sent me a note saying, listen, I saw some of your work on the director's edition, and I also did a pitch for redoing the original series effects in CG and replacing that, which Paramount later did. And he wanted to see if I would be interested in helping them out with their production. And I said, you know what? Sure, why not? And so I went up there one summer when they were doing a shoot that David Gerrold was directing at the time. David Gerrold, of course, being the writer of The Trouble with Tribbles and one of the original creators of the Star Trek series and Next Generation. David is very heavily involved in working with these guys. He also got Dorothy Fontana to write an episode for them, and and they both got Walter Koenig and George Takei to come and reprise their roles in the show.
Wow!
And it's it's really fun because you get to. It's basically a Star Trek summer camp. It's basically Field of Dreams for Star Trek fans. You go there and you get to work on a production and have some fun. And, it is a lot of fun. And I went up there just observing and helping with some visual effects stuff on that first one. And then James called me and said, hey, would you like to act in one? Well, because he knew that I was a bit of a ham. And we were goofing around on set on the David Gerrold shoot. And I'd do a moderately accurate William Shatner impersonation. And we were, goofing around with that. And so he said he got this script from a fan who wanted to get an episode in there, and it was a sequel to the original series episode Bread and Circuses, where they go to the Roman planet. Mm-hmm. And he wanted me to play the proconsul, the Caesar of the Roman planet. And I said, you know what, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so he sent me the script, and then a few months later, I was there in upstate New York playing the proconsul, and it was a whole lot of fun.
Are you directing an upcoming episode as well? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, this past June, I was up there and directed an episode called The Holiest Thing, written by Rick Chambers, the same guy who wrote the Bread and Savagery, which is the name of the episode I played the proconsul in. And we are in the midst of post-production on that right now, finishing it up for a February 14th Valentine's Day release, because it involves, let's just say, the meeting of Captain Kirk and, okay, I'll say it, it's Dr. Marcus.
Very cool.
So it's our take on how they met.
Very, very cool. Well, that'll be about a month and a half after this podcast airs, so we'll have to link to that from the blog.
That'd be good.
One more Star Trek related thing.
Sure.
I understand you did some effects work on, was it the first episode of Voyager?
I didn't do effects work. I did concept art work on the first episode of Voyager. Yeah, I was hired as an illustrator on that, working with Rick Sternbach and Richard James, the production designer, on the pilot. And I got to design some stuff, and it was basically just filling in because, Rick was busy working on designing the Voyager itself, and, they needed someone else to come in and pinch hit for doing some of the other stuff that was in the episode. And so I was there for a few months working in a nice little office on Paramount. It was fun. It was basically my first job with the Next Generation crew, which was fun. I mean, not the on-screen crew, but the behind-the-scenes crew who were on Voyager, and that was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's cool. You do a lot of illustration. What's your experience of that? What sort of illustration have you done, and what kind of stuff do you prefer to do?
Well, I really enjoy designing things and coming up with concept art and designing either sets or props or vehicles or things like that. Mm-hmm. And that's just something that I really enjoy to do, and especially working for fun people who enjoy it too. I've also done storyboards in the past. That is less fun for me because it's a lot of redoing things, because that's just the nature of the beast.
How so?
Because the moment you finish a sequence, either the script has changed, or the director has changed their minds, or what you came up with is entirely what they don't want. a lot of times, the job of the illustrator is to show everybody what they don't want to do. Because it's basically the first take of what the script is going to entail. Because a lot of people who read the script in the movie business don't actually visualize what it's going to be. And that's, thank goodness for that, or I would be out of a job. But the job of the production illustrator and the art department is to show them what it's going to be and what the problems are going to be in doing it. So that's a lot of fun, but it's also a little bit frustrating when everyone isn't on the same page. But the job that I do is to help everyone get on the same page, and according to the director and the production designer and how they want things to be, mm-hmm. to direct things in that direction, to be redundant.
So you kind of give them that first, I didn't realize it was going to be that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's change that up.
Exactly, yep. So. That happens a lot in storyboards, too. When they see the extent of a sequence, they say, oh, okay, well, we can't afford that. Let's pare it down and figure out another way to do this. Mm. And, that's fun to figure out, but there are guys who are way better at that I would rather have them do that.
So what is the difference between, what is like conceptual illustration versus you're listed as production illustrator on several movies.
It's a very fine line. It's basically whatever the production wants to call me. The difference is very slight, but when I'm doing a concept illustration job, I'm also coming up with the ideas behind the drawings and designs. And just the regular production illustrator is there to basically draw what the either director or production designer have in mind to show everyone else. Obviously, the concept illustrator has to answer to the director and the production designer.
Right.
But it's more of a creative job than the regular production illustrator job. But beyond that, it's only a question of semantics at what they want to call you that week. So.
Are there any films that you've worked on that you're especially fond of having done illustration for?
They're all fun in their own way. I will say that the most of my stuff that has got into a movie is from a few years ago, from the Chronicles of Riddick, where I got to work with a great team of concept guys. And the first half of that movie with all the bad guys are my designs and another guy by the name of Matt Codd, who is a great illustrator too. And, we basically worked on the bad guys in that and designed everything from their vehicles and their costumes and their environments and all that sort of stuff. And that was a lot of fun. Every frame is something that I worked on. So that's the most enjoyment I get from designing and doing concept illustration.
Very, very cool. You've worked on a couple of ones that I've really enjoyed over the last few years of the new Tron Legacy movie and also Pacific Rim. Is that correct?
I didn't work on Pacific Rim.
Oh, okay. IMDb has it wrong, I guess.
I enjoyed it, though. I wonder what that is. I'll have to check my IMDb thing. Maybe I worked at it without knowing it. I got to work on Tron Legacy for a little bit in the first few weeks. I didn't get to do any of the fun stuff, though. I got to work on the real Earth time locations. I did get to go and scout the original Flynn's Arcade and in Culver City, and it's now a restaurant and very boring, but the exterior looks the same. And I got to do some concept work of how the exterior would look these days, where Flynn's son goes and discovers the secret room and all that sort of stuff. And I did a couple paintings of the dilapidated arcade machines standing idle in the show. So that was fun.
And you were also a production illustrator on Master and Commander, Far Side of the World.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Not only working with Bill Sandell, who is a production designer that I've worked with many times before, but also for the great Peter Weir, who I've loved his movies for years and years. I got to learn all about sailing ships and how they went together, and that was all shot down in the Baja studios that Cameron set up for Titanic, the Fox Baja studios down in Mexico. And I got to go down there and play around on the fake sailing ships, and my job basically was to come up with the way and extent of the damage that the Surprise would undergo during the various attacks, and then how they would repair it. And so I did a bunch of drawings of figuring that out, and working with the maritime advisors and these guys who've built replicas of sailing ships and knew exactly which end was what and how they would go about repairing things in the middle of the ocean, basically. Huh. So that was a lot of fun to learn about. That's the great thing about working on movies, is that for the space of a few months, you have to take a crash course in all these various topics and become very knowledgeable about them in a very short amount of time, so that you can basically fake it as you go through and make everything as real as possible. And so that was a fun one, and I'm really proud that my name is attached to that movie, because it's one of my favorites. And when I first read the script, I was thinking, holy cow, this is Star Trek. There's
definitely that kind of Kirk Bones vibe between the main characters.
And, those books were written in, I think, like 1972 or 73.
Huh.
So I got a feeling that there was a little of that energy that the author included in the book. I really think that there was an influence there.
The Master and Commander is definitely one of my top movies, and
it's a great film, yeah. And it really puts you there. It's very happy with it.
You mentioned earlier that you worked on the Alien Legacy documentary. What was your involvement with that?
Well, I was basically as an art director on the DVD project. This was for the first. How many Alien discs have there been? Quite a few. This was before the mammoth DVD set that had everything in it. Mm-hmm. This was, I think, the first release on DVD of Alien. And we did a half-an-hour documentary that was, I think, called The Eighth Passenger, something like that. Fox retitled it. It was a documentary interviewing a bunch of the people who worked on the original Alien. And that was a lot of fun, because I got to go on several of the interviews with a bunch of the crew. I had known Ron Cobb from years ago. My first project I worked on was The Abyss, and I got to meet him on that and work on that as a production assistant. And that was a lot of fun, and I'd always loved Ron Cobb's designs and was a big fan of his, particularly from his work on Alien. So I was able to be around for his interview, and for Les Dilley, who was the designer on The Abyss and was an art director on Alien. And so I got to be around for that. And the role of an art director on a documentary is extremely little. That's a title that I was happy with, because I got to design the on-screen graphics and the title sequence and all that sort of stuff. The main thing was that I got to help with interviews, and they asked my opinion on the cut of the documentary. So,
oh, very nice. Actually, by coincidence, we're going to be talking about Alien in our next segment.
One of my favorites.
Is there anything you're working on now that you'd like to plug?
Well, I finished a couple months on the Batman versus Superman movie.
Ah, nice.
And that's all I can say about that.
Fair enough.
Otherwise, they would kill me in a horrible way.
Fair enough. And so where can people find more about your work?
Well, they can always find what I'm doing on beta5.com. That's all one word, BETAFIVE.com. They can look up my blog, blog.darendoch.com, and that's Daren Doch, DARENDOC.com. Look for Star Trek Phase 2 on the web. They're releasing an episode, Kitumba, which was a very big fan
requested one. It's a big original series story about the Klingons, and that's coming out the first of the year. And then my episode, The Holiest Thing, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, a love story for Captain Kirk.
Oh, very cool. Have to check that out.
I'm all over the place and can be found quite easily, unfortunately.
Cool. Well, we'll put those in the show notes to make it even easier. Thank you, Daren, for coming on.
Thanks so much, Mark.
This edition of the Optical Trivia Contest brought to you by Cinefx. Are you a fan of movie magic? Of course you are, and Cinefx is the magazine for you. This quarterly publication has been documenting motion picture visual effects for more than 3 decades. Since 1980, it's been the Bible for the visual effects industry, and a favorite magazine of movie effects enthusiasts all over the world, covering the field like no other publication. Profusely illustrated in color, with in-depth articles and interviews, and as many as 150 pages per issue, Cinefx offers a captivating look at the technologies and techniques behind our most popular and enduring films. Order your subscription today at cinefx.com, or check out their new iPad edition, an enhanced version of the print magazine with even more photos, video content, and interactivity, available now on iTunes. For this edition of the trivia contest, answer this question. What was the number printed on the side of the shuttle pod that Kirk and Scotty took over to the Enterprise at the beginning of Star Trek the Motion Picture? Send your answer to feedback@opticalpodcast.com by January 31st for your chance to win. One winner will be randomly picked from the correct entries to receive a 1-year subscription to the print edition of Cinefx magazine. That's 4 issues in your mailbox. This music and all of the music in this episode is from our good friend Digital Drew, who also composed the theme for the podcast. The tracks that appear in this episode will be listed in the show notes, but you can find more of Drew's music at digitaldrew, that's DROO.com. Next up, our discussion with Tom Schmidt of Percolate Digital about what is an optical anyway. So for our first tech segment, I brought on my good friend Tom Schmidt. Tom, how are you doing?
Good, Mark.
And we're since the podcast is called The Optical, what is an optical? What's an optical shot?
Well, an optical to me, as I grew up in this industry, an optical was always that special piece of post-production magic that was in film, where something that was not there when originally shot was added later. And that could be anything from a matte painting of the castle on the mountain as they're approaching it from below, to something as noted as like the Death Star hovering over a planet, to model work in the foreground where you might add some forced perspective stuff in the foreground that would be either small cars or buildings or something along those lines.
Or like that shot in Star Trek, the motion picture, and there's like the shot of Spock on Vulcan, and there's like kind of this big, stairs leading up to this temple that aren't really there in real life, but they're just kind of like sitting a few feet in front of the camera. Yeah. And then, Leonard Nimoy and everybody else are way off in the distance. So it looks like they're the same size.
And that's a nuanced thing. I don't even think they do anymore, because obviously we can add stuff in CG and composite with tracking and all that sort of thing. But back then, you had to make the perspective match where you're going to put your camera. So
right.
It was very much limited where you could how you could move your camera. So you had to be much more careful on how you set up your shots. Nowadays, what's replaced the optical are things like tracking dots and set extensions.
CGI.
And CGI, CGI is still an optical, it's still very much placing things in the scene that were not there. But the benefits to us today is that we can be much more freeform and allow the filmmaker a far greater latitude to make it up as they go.
Right.
There's back in the optical days, man. You just your camera's locked down, and you remember you always could tell when an optical shot was coming because all of a sudden the camera would be perfectly still. Like we could go from like panning and flying cameras to all of a sudden the camera's locked down, and we're now on our optical.
So is that an optical shot is probably what we would now call VFX or visual effects. At what point did that become VFX instead of an optical? Is that kind of when we went away from like actually using film and optical printers to actually put two pieces of film together versus the modern forms of digital compositing and all that? Is that kind of when the word optical fell out of favor, do you think? Or?
I think so. That's an interesting question because I think that's one of those things where once they started to make the migration over to digital, I think the industry kind of said, okay, we really can't call it an optical anymore because we're not using optical printers. So they had to come up with a larger term for it. I think VFX is what stuck. In terms of what we do at Percolate, we're working now in the 4K realm. And we're discovering that within the industry, 4K is the accepted name of the format that we're working in. But in the consumer end of our world, the preferred term is UHD.
Ultra HD. Right.
Ultra HD, ultra high definition, because the industry, and to their credit, realizes that people get HD. They understand HD because everybody has HD. So let's put a U in front of it, and that makes more sense to people than 4K, because I can't tell you how many people have asked us what 4K is, but they do get UHD. So there's kind of been this migration over to UHD simply because it wasn't informative or correct to really call it 4K, and plus it just wouldn't stick.
Right, because it's actually, 3,960 pixels wide instead of...
3840 by 2160. I got that tattooed on my arm.
So it's kind of the same thing with optical versus visual effects. It's like once they actually stopped using like actual optics lenses to, kind of put this stuff together, that's kind of, why call it optical anymore? Yeah, they had to. But I always liked the term optical. When you started this podcast and the website, I thought that's such a great name for this, though, because I think the majority of people that work in VFX now have a great love of the craftsmanship that optical is required. There's a certain sloppiness we can get away with now. Back when they were doing real optical printer and they were packing film and, you had to go through God knows how many layers of packed film to create one optical. It was a much more, God, I just think the people were smarter. I really do, because they just simply had to come up with these incredible ways to do these really complex effects, but kind of make it all happen in one pass. Otherwise, you get generational loss because you can't, printing and reprinting film, obviously you get degradation, and you don't have that anymore in digital. Because, a lot of times you'll have at least 5 layers of film. There'll be like, the one element and then a holdout mat for that element and then another element and the holdout mat for that and then putting that onto the, final piece of film. And just having to understand the physics of like, how the light actually bends through all of those lenses to get to the same size image on the other end of it.
Exactly. And then the color correction involved in that. And, just having one mat that's just a little bit out of line. And, you look at things like the scene of the Enterprise leaving dry dock. I believe it was a high-con. They didn't do it on green screen or blue screen. They did it as a high-con.
Oh, yeah. It was a completely white background and the model element kind of in shadow in front of it. So they would have a black and white element. And with doing it as a high-con and the reflective surface of the Enterprise model, you would still see a lot of tearing on the surface of it because it simply was not a perfect matte. Because there was a reflection from that white background on the surface of the model itself.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, they chose to go with a high-con because it was the best way they could get a clean matte off of that model because it was a reflective surface.
Right.
And going with green or blue was just reflecting. It was just reflecting too much, and it was just tearing.
Right. Because I think on that Actually, it was John Dextra's group at Apogee were using the high contrast mats, and Doug Trumbull's group was using blue screen. So they would use it for different elements, like try and figure out what was best for which group to do, depending on which technology was going to work better.
Yeah.
And like the blue screen, it was just like there was so much blue spill, reflected on that model that they just couldn't get a clean mat out of it.
Yeah. With us in the digital realm, the trial and error is easy. You just try, if it doesn't work, you find another compositing method.
Oh, it's a lot cheaper now too.
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper now. But back then you had to, you had to shoot it, and then you had to print it. And what happens if the shooting was just not going to work? You had to go back and reshoot that stuff.
Yeah.
And that was a couple of days of work right there. Yeah, they were brave. I just think they were far braver than we.
You head up the group called Percolate Digital.
Correct.
And what are you guys working on now?
We are working on several projects, one of which is already out. It's a space show called Unraveling the Cosmos.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I worked on that a little bit.
Yes, you might be familiar with it. And it actually was the first 4K stereo television show.
Very nice.
Yeah, we did portions of it in the cloud. We did all of it virtually with people in different cities, but everyone knew each other, so we all had a good line of communication going. But it was something that had not been done before. It's a series of really long shots, taking advantage of the stereo aspect of HD, because the series itself was created in stereo, and then the network 3Net decided to make that their first 4K show.
Right.
But the stereo version of the show was, it was a bunch of artists, which in and of itself is not something so common. Our core group was 12 people with 3 lead artists, one for each episode. And it was a very, very small crew, produced almost 4 full hours of CG in the course of a year. And I'm proud of that accomplishment, because there was a lot of people that were not quite sure that we could pull that off. And there are times, I must be honest, sometimes you just can't play it safe. And this was one of those moments where I think we all just said, we have our shot. Let's take our shot.
Yeah.
And but back in the day, creating things like Star Wars and Close Encounters, and even further back to 2001. Mm-hmm. A lot of the stuff they made up as they went. Motion control cameras. You had the rudimentary forms of them in 2001. Then you had silent running, which was kind of built out a little further in terms of repeatable camera moves. There's a lot of tech that hadn't been done before that people said, I think we can do it for this. And you test it, and it works fine, of course, in tests. But then when you get into the reality of production, then you realize, well, now this is not quite going the way I thought it would. Even the great stories with Gravity, every day they were doubting they could do it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've heard and read interviews with both George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, and Alfonso Cuarón, who was the filmmaker, who essentially said, "Yeah, we weren't quite sure we could do this." and I mean, he was being nice. I mean, Sandra Bullock was saying, "Yeah, they didn't think they could do it." And every day they would go in, not so much not thinking they could do it, but knowing that they had a really, really steep mountain to climb. And I think that any advancement in technology, whether it's learning that green screen works better than blue screen, and then committing to green screen for an entire film, to doing all the stereo for Gravity in post-production. That film was shot with a single camera, and all the stereo was created in post, and the stereo is just phenomenal. I mean,
it is. I was totally surprised to find out that it was a post conversion, because I mean they planned for it to be that way from the very beginning, and planned for the way that the things were shot, and there's so much CGI in the film, and that of course can be rendered out straight to stereo. But it was just, that is one of the best stereo movies I'd ever seen, and it just totally floored me that it was a conversion.
Yeah, it was. I was startled to hear that too. I mean, the whole thing was that way. It was one of these things where we think we can do it. And even going back to Jurassic Park, credit to ILM and Dennis Muren and obviously Spielberg. They were committing to Phil Tippett's puppets for Jurassic Park. And then, Dennis Muren and his crew decided, something, I bet we could render a photorealistic dinosaur in CG and make it work for this movie.
Doing that test with the running Gallimimus
herds.
And
And then, and then there's that great line where Spielberg turns to Phil Tippett and says, "Well, it looks like you're extinct," which then made it into the film. Yeah, and even with the two great examples of how things didn't work as planned, but then made it all better. Of course, the shark from Jaws, when it simply did not work. The only times it did work were pretty much the scenes you see in the film.
Right.
But they were able to build that slow reveal of the shark, which, became the benchmark for how to roll out a terror narrative. Just let's show a little bit of the terror until at the very end we pay it off big. And that was simply because the shark didn't work. And then to a further degree in Jurassic Park with the dinosaurs, they built that full-size T-Rex. And what they didn't count on was that they were going to be shooting in rain. And that T-Rex was made out of foam. And,
and it got soaked with rain.
And it got soaked with rain and was just, it was like, it had like the DTs and it was trembling and and it was all they could do to get that T-Rex to work. And, but I remember the first time I saw Jurassic Park and I'd read about the fact that they had, built this T-Rex and all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking back to like King Kong when
Willis O'Brien?
No, the 77, John Gillerman, King Kong, where Dino De Laurentiis went and built that 40-foot Kong. And it was a robot that didn't work. And but they used it for all the promotional stuff. Like, look, they built a giant Kong. And it's only in for like 3 seconds in the movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It looked terrible. It didn't move right, obviously, and it was just horrible. When the first time we see the T-Rex step over the wall when it's raining, I thought to myself, "Holy crap! Spielberg and those guys got that T-Rex robot to walk." And then I realized, oh my God, I'm looking at CG. That was the first time that it really hit me just how good CG could be. And you see the water dripping down him, and he is absolutely there. He's absolutely there in the scene.
Very cool. That's what I think they had kind of a similar thing with Alien, where they put the guy in the suit, but they figured, well, we really can't show him that much because it kind of looks like a guy in a suit.
Yeah.
So kind of, taking that Jaws' cue about like, oh, we'll just show a little snippet of him here and there and like try and put him in an awkward position and, make him look interesting and not hang on him too much.
I hadn't heard that, but that makes total sense because that's one of those great slow reveals too. That's one of the great, gross movie monsters. That thing still freaks me out. The jawed tongue. That's just a creepy idea. People that come up with that stuff is just, I don't know. I worry sometimes that people in this industry, if they weren't working in this industry, would be like serial killers or something.
Well, we're actually going to be talking about Alien next with Matt Robotham. But thank you, Tom, for being on.
My pleasure.
And now on to Alien. I have Matt Robotham with me.
Hey.
Matt is a co-host of the Post-Atomic Horror.
That is true.
And an Alien enthusiast.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about this the other night, or last night when I was watching this. It's like, when I was growing up, like, this was my trilogy rather than, like, Star Wars. Like, I love these movies.
They're definitely some of my favorite horror movies.
Oh, yeah. And they're each, like, they're so different from one another. Like, you start with the first one, which is like a haunted house movie. Mm-hmm. And then you move on to the second one, which is like a thriller.
I thought that was really great that they kind of kept bringing in new directors and new writers and kind of fresh blood as far as that goes to, like, tell a different story every time.
Oh, yeah. Well, like, that's one of the things that's so awesome about it. Like, each one of those is such a uniquely different story. But,
yeah, I love the diversity of it.
Yeah. It's just that there's so much potential in that universe.
Yeah, because like in a lot of other trilogies or quadrilogies or whatever they're calling it.
We're just going to make up words for...
You usually get it's always from the same perspective.
But with these, they really took sort of the basic concept, which is this thing and Ripley, and just sort of everything else they can just go nuts with, and they can explore this weird universe they've got.
Speaking of that, the movie starts out with a lot of that, just kind of like setting in place the universe in which we exist here. There's just shots of empty corridors, and the ship kind of slowly waking up, but we don't even see any people for 3 or 4 minutes.
No, it's like 3 or 4 minutes before the pods start popping open. And the ship itself, like, it doesn't look like something that people are supposed to live in. Like, it's cramped, and like the corridors are all really kind of gross and oily. It doesn't look clean, and it doesn't look safe. Like, it really looks like you could cut yourself walking down a lot of those hallways.
Oh yeah. Coming at it from the perspective of trying to make it, have that used future, which I guess.
Oh yeah.
George Lucas said he was trying to go for a couple of years before with Star Wars, but it was an interesting thing that Dan O'Bannon, who was the original writer, and he had kept his fingers in the process throughout. He said that they really wanted to do that even on Dark Star, which was a movie he worked on with John Carpenter a few years before that, but it was like. It was spaceship, and there was an alien, but it was kind of a comedy, and the alien was a beach ball, and it was not really
somewhat less threatening.
Yes, not quite as high production values, but they did some inventive stuff with the miniatures and the spaceships and stuff. There was some cool satire going on, but they tried to do it even there, kind of that used future, but they found that like. They actually kind of grimed things up on the set, but it didn't look that grimy on film. He thought that Star Wars also didn't read as grimy as he thought it should. And when he was talking with the director, Ridley Scott, he was like, really, I think you've got to like grime it up about 3 times worse than you actually want it to look in the finished film. And I think they maybe even went a little over that.
The camera may add 10 pounds, but it cleans up your room by about 80%. Probably the problem.
Exactly. So then we see the folks waking up. This is cool, just like little burst of air when the door to the cryo chamber opens. It just, I don't know, it's like these tiny, tiny little details that I love kind of in the, as we're saying, the world building here.
And you're seeing all this stuff, and none of it's explained to you,
Right. Totally. Like we just go right into the breakfast scene. And
yeah, exactly.
It's like, they're all people who've worked together for ages, however long, and they're just, getting on with their day. And we don't get any explanation at all. It's
so blue collar too, like, it's just a bunch of guys having breakfast, smoking, and like complaining and stuff. And they're on a spaceship, for crying out loud. And they're just going about their day. Well, they all look kind of hungover.
The phrase "truckers in space" has been tossed about, and
that's really good. I've never thought about that, but that's really accurate for sort of what they're doing up there.
Yeah, they go through. They find out that they've been stopped because they got some sort of signal from the planet. So they got to go check it out, and they separate from the big refinery thing, which is this enormous model with these big cathedral-like spires and stuff on it.
I love the look of the Nostromo so much.
Yeah, just amazing model work on it.
Just this huge, like, again, pointy, broken looking, but it's enormous. Like, it's got they do the sort of the Star Destroyer shot as the movie's opening, right? Mm-hmm. And it looked like the scale on it is just enormous.
Oh yeah, I had forgotten that before I watched it this past time. It's just like it just keeps going and going and going past the camera.
Yeah.
And I read, I think it was in the Cinefx article, that they said the big model that they shot, a lot of the close-ups with, it was 40 feet long.
Oh my God, really?
Holy cow.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they spent a lot of detail on that and on the Nostromo itself landing on the planet.
Yep.
And they have this gigantic foot. Well, it's not gigantic, it's a model, but it comes down and crushes these rocks. And they go out in their spacesuits.
That's it. That's another thing I love. They've got the bulky spacesuits when they're getting out there.
Yeah.
Everything looks so lived in, Like no one's walking out in like you've got that sleek Spock spacesuit that he wears in Star Trek Motion Picture, right?
Sure.
These guys are wearing these bulky like things that look like they take forever to get in and out of.
Yeah. It's interesting how many designers worked on this project too, because there's Ron Cobb worked on the Nostromo design and the interiors and exterior and everything about the ship, and he even designed these really cool little icons that you can, once you know about them, you just kind of see them popping up all over the ship. There's like actually icons that say, well, behind this door there's no gravity and there's a vacuum and you might not want to open it. Jean Girard, is that how you pronounce his name? Mobius?
Is it Girard? I don't know.
He came in for only just like a couple of days and actually designed most of the costumes, or at least kind of the basis of what became the costumes. But specifically his spacesuits, those are his, and they came almost directly from his drawings.
Oh, I love those things.
They've almost got this like samurai armor look to them.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then, of course, there's H.R. Giger, which I don't think it stands for "Hey, really, Giger"? Is that?
Possibly not in real life, but
I've been listening too much to
the Super Ego podcast.
Super Ego podcast, yeah. But
my initials stand for "Hey, really, Giger."
I believe it's Hans Rudolf Giger. Or
yeah,
Rudy.
I like mine better.
Yeah, I do too. And he designed the alien. There was some collaboration on the different stages of the alien, but the big alien was definitely all him.
Now, and he also did the alien ship interior, right? Like the interior, like the sort of the hive look and the space jockey.
Yep, that whole thing. The derelict ship itself, the creepy vagina-like portals that they have to walk through to get into the ship. And then there's all the walls that look like they're made of ribs or bones or something. And,
oh God, one of my most favorite designs ever.
And apparently he didn't want to leave his studio in Switzerland at first.
Right.
He just okay, I'll sketch off these designs and send them to London, and they can do whatever they are going to do with them.
He'd been working on Dune or something, wasn't it? And they never
paid him.
They never paid him, so he wasn't really into working on film again.
Yeah, but he got kind of intrigued in it, and eventually, I guess, with some of the stuff that people were, kind of taking liberties with his designs, like, I want this to come out the way I drew it. So he actually ended up, moving out to the studios and working on stuff directly, even to the point that once they built the set, like with all the ribs, he sculpted one, and then they, made molds and cast a bunch of them so they could make the repeating wall. But then to make it look exactly the way he wanted to have it look, he hand painted tons of that set with his airbrush and just came in.
Oh my God.
I got to get the shading just right and everything, like the space jockey and the whole set around it. Was he hand painted that?
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that attention to detail and to the craft. I really think that's one of the things that sort of endears me to this movie so much. Like, that world is so perfectly realized.
Right. So they get in there. They've got the space jockey, which is this really creepy thing. Apparently, he built some of his sculptures. He actually like started with real bones and then kind of built up plasticine and stuff on top of it.
Oh my God, really? I have never heard that before.
And they were saying that, he went to the secretary on the set there and was like, I need these bones. Order me lots of bones. I'm doing my horrible H.R. Giger.
You person, bring me the bones, the human bones I am building.
And they got some of them from like a local slaughterhouse, and they weren't as dry as he was used to working with. He said, even for me, terrible smell. Oh, that's really creepy. There was so much real animal parts that were used on this movie. It's pretty crazy.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, the bones, obviously, but like when the face hugger, when it finally comes off of Kane's face and they're kind of like poking around at it to see what its innards are like, that's like all, like oysters and mussels and stuff that Ridley Scott took a tweezers and kind of stacked them all in there. So they look gross.
That's so cool.
When the egg opens, there's Nottingham lace in there, which is like part of a cow's stomach.
Oh my God.
And there was also sheep's intestines that was part of sprung out of the egg and hit Kane in the face.
That explains why the movie has that organic look to it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe they just had laxer laws in England at that point.
This is sanitary, right? What? Oh, yeah, sure. Go put your face in that cow's guts.
then they cut to the face hugger, which is an amazing design.
Oh god, that thing is so cool looking.
Like if you see Giger's early drawings of it, it's much bigger than it ended up being.
Mm-hmm.
It was like almost half a man's height, and but it did start out with those fingers, and they kind of latched onto, no pun intended, that idea. and
then it's also just got like a giant penis on one end, which is
it
pretty
is
disturbing.
An organ of reproduction.
This is true.
So
when I used to work at the comic store, we'd get in Giger art books.
Oh yeah,
pretty regularly, and they would always like fly off the shelves. Like, that guy has such a unique art style,
Yeah,
it's so creepy looking.
I just love that design there. It's so functional.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to grab a hold of your face. It's got the organ it needs to deposit whatever, alien baby in your stomach.
I hope just like it's like a seed or something, if I recall.
So Kane he's okay. They've like, this thing has finally fallen off of him, and they poke around in the oysters and stuff, and it's really gooey and gross. He seems to be fine. They lift off, which I love that shot of them lifting off, because it's got the amount of like, dust and debris that's flying around. It looks amazing, but there's these little tiny lights that are on the bottom of the Nostromo in these rows, and they're like, none of them are quite straight. They're all these little crooked lights, and I just love that bit of crookedness.
Yeah.
I'm sure the model builder is like, damn it, I couldn't get it perfectly straight. It doesn't look real, but I don't know. I just kind of love that.
It adds to that broken crappiness to everything in Alien, Like, this ship is probably old as hell and falling apart and everything.
And the chestburster scene.
One of the most famous scenes in horror movie history.
And apparently only John Hurt, who was the guy who was going to have the alien burst out of his chest, and I guess Tom Skerritt was also there while they were setting up, but none of the other crew members, I mean, they read the script, they knew what was going to happen, but they didn't know exactly how it was all going to work out. And they did one take. They got this little air ram that was supposed to push the little chest burster up out of the shirt, and it they used acid to make the shirt a little bit weaker, but it wasn't weak enough, so it didn't quite get through.
So that's like they're trying to force it through there?
Yes. So they reset and scored the shirt with a razor blade so it would weaken it even more.
Yeah.
And they finally brought everybody back in for another take, and bam, came up out of there. And there was some tubes that they were like, pushing some fake studio blood into the cavity in his chest and, make it look super gross. And it just so happened that one of them was kind of sticking out in an odd angle and just completely smacked Veronica Cartwright right in the face. So she's like soaked in blood. It was kind of the force of it knocked her backwards, and she says she fell on her ass and her cowboy boots were sticking up in the air.
Is that take still in the movie?
In the bonus features on the Blu-ray, they have that actual shot, and it's like way more than there is in the actual movie. So she was completely soaked.
Oh my god, that's hilarious. This gets Evil Deaded right in the face.
But I think that was a cool technique by Ridley Scott, just kind of like try and hide it as much as possible from the actors. So they don't, they kind of have an idea of what's going to happen, but they can actually have that element of surprise so they can give a better reaction in the film.
You want to capture that look of terror when that thing comes out.
Yeah.
And it's such a horrible concept. This is the first time I was watching, and I really sort of paid attention to Kane when it's coming out of him. And that dude is just writhing around on the table in agony, and he's still alive when it comes out.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything as horrible as that.
They switched to the other shot, and of course it's a fake chest in front of him, but it's his real head and hands, and he's got his hands, like twitching, and it's just like,
yeah. And I love the look that the alien gives when it's sort of out. It's got this sort of weird calmness to it when it's finally born, and it's just sort of looking around, and then it does that creepy sort of like zip away where it like flies across the table.
Oh, yeah.
But like for like a weird little puppet, it looks really good.
Oh, yeah. And apparently they put like a little compressed air cylinder hooked up to an air tube they hooked into the tail. So when they let that go, it's like the tail's just whipping all over the place.
Oh, is that how that's so cool?
Yeah. Okay. So then the alien's out there. Kane is dead. They're kind of poking around in different spaces to see if they see this little thing.
Right.
Eventually, Brett Harry Dean Stanton walks off by himself, which is a bad idea.
Gotta go find the friggin' cat. The amount of people who get killed because of this cat, I swear to God.
That's an interesting thread through that. They're looking for the cat, and then he lets the cat run away.
Mm-hmm.
So then, that's why they got to go find it because, they're going to mistake it for the alien or something. And
yeah.
There seems like there's so many scenes where somebody gets it and the cat is just kind of looking like enabling the alien.
That cat, you find out later that cat paid the alien off to bump off the crew. Yes, good. This'll teach you not to feed me fancy feast in a crystal bowl.
Well, now the alien isn't this tiny little thing anymore. It's this huge thing already, which is kind of amazing. But it was interesting, a thing that Ridley Scott brought up in the commentary that kind of thought of it as maybe it had a very short life cycle in which it had to procreate and then die pretty quickly, almost insect like, which is maybe why it was at the end of the film when it's kind of curled up inside the Narcissus that it had just kind of like gone to find a quiet place to die at that point. There was a lot of thought that went into the life cycle of this creature. And
this is one of the things I used to be like when I was in high school. I was fascinated by like trying to figure out how this all worked.
So then Dallas goes crawling around in the air vents, and obviously that's a bad idea. But I love that in both of these encounters we hardly see anything of the alien.
No, it's very Jaws-like in that sort of like you see as little of it as possible at the beginning.
Right. I think, and that was something they mentioned too in the editing, that they as they went from rough cut and kind of did further and further versions of the cut, there was less and less and less of the alien in each version, or it was much more effective to just kind of let the audience imagine it and not to show as much of it.
You combine that sort of unseenness to what you can see, and what you can see of the alien is it's just so different from anything else, right? That like big elongated head with the double teeth.
Yeah.
Like it does when it kills Brett for the first time. You get that close-up of the, basically the steel teeth.
And then later we get to see, he opens his mouth and there's a tongue with another set of teeth. I mean, it almost seems like an animal that's engineered for a certain purpose. Just to eat things and kill and... Okay, and so now that the captain is dead, Ripley should be next in line for command, and she, goes to the computer and isn't allowed to know everything about the orders that are supposed to be going on. And she eventually overrides it and figures out that the science officer, Ash, is hiding something.
The computer, Mother.
Yes.
Which is this room that's basically full of computer.
There's so many lights.
It's all computer. And this tiny little, Commodore 64 monitor, which I love computers in 80s movies, or 70s movies in this case.
Yeah.
Where they've got that sort of the blurry monitor screen. It's the same thing as in the Thing.
So then we're back to Ash, about to give her what for. And the big guy, Yaphet Kotto. Parker, thank you. Bashes him with, I don't know, fire extinguisher or something pretty heavy, and his head just comes right off.
Falls off.
And, which reveals that he's an android, which I thought was pretty cool. That was the one thing that Dan O'Bannon and Ron Chu said that, that wasn't part of their original script. And these other guys there was this whole fight over writing credit on this film. But these other guys, that was the one main new idea that they contributed. And I thought that was really cool. If you're this huge company who's sending these guys out however many, millions of miles, and they have to be in cryosleep because it's so damn long, that, wouldn't you want to keep an eye on your assets, this ginormous multi-billion-dollar refinery in space? And, if these 7 people who are running it, maybe, one of them decides, well, I'm going to steal the ship and take it somewhere else.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at Brett and Parker. These are not the most reliable employees you could possibly have.
Right.
One of the things I love is that reveal that he's an android just is so cool. And the interior of him is so different than what you would expect from,
Yeah, there's no circuitry.
There's no circuitry. It's just this weird milk stuff and these little it's almost like bubble wrap or something inside of him, you know?
Yeah, there's like little tubes connected to little glass balls. And
yeah.
Who knows what it does, but
like
it looks fascinating.
I've seen this movie so many times. I wish I could go back and have watched it the first time before I knew all of the surprises in this, because I will tell you right now, if not knowing that he's an android, I would have no idea what's going on. When he starts sweating milk, like right before he's about to kill her with the magazine, it's so weird.
I love that aspect of this where it's like it's almost so futuristic that we don't even have a frame of reference for what sort of technology he has. And I think it works really well because it's something that's pretty simple as far as the design of it. You're not trying to make it look like, like Data in Star Trek The Next Generation, where it's full of circuits.
You just pull off his head and there's a Christmas tree in there, yeah. No, but I like that concept of, since we find out the company's basically setting them up, of course they're going to want someone on the ship who the alien isn't going to want to attack or anything.
But that is an interesting point, though, since he's not human and maybe not, I don't know, maybe a little organic, but not in any way that the alien would want to eat him. That he's the one who'll probably survive. And, they can't really get back home now in the Nostromo. And the alien comes and grabs Yaphet Kotto and Veronica Cartwright. The actors. He didn't, not the characters. He actually killed the actor.
Come on, man! I'm just trying to get to work here.
And then at that point, Ripley's like, "Okay, I'm the only one left. I'm going to take the cat and go." Which I don't know why she wants to take the cat, but
gotta take that cat.
And I love the futuristic cat carrier.
Right. Like
it's almost made to the same degree as the spaceship models, where these little bits of, they call them like greebles, like little tiny bits of detail glued onto the outside, so make it look futuristic. But I love when she goes in to do the self-destruct of the Nostromo. I love all of this like crazy different mechanical stuff, pulling these levers and pulling up these little tubes.
She's got to...
It's like there's so much stuff that she has to do the self-destruct. And I love that. It should be hard. Like, in Star Trek, it's just a couple of voice commands.
Yeah, computer, blow up ship, blowing up ship in 10, 9.
I love that it doesn't feel like a cheap effort.
It's like it's a self-destruct, but it's like she actually has to do something. Like she's like, what is it? Like she's she's leaking coolant or something. They have some explanation. I can't remember what it is now.
Yeah, they're essentially like overheating the main drives or something like that.
But like she's physically pushing these things into these slots, and it's so cool.
Yeah, just again, attention to detail.
That lived in universe where everything works.
Right.
Everything's there for a reason.
And then there's like the smoke that's there for a reason, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And that room that dumps water for that I haven't been able to figure out since I watched this movie the first time.
Condensation. I don't know.
It's apparently clean enough that Brett can just drink it.
Yeah, that
drove me crazy.
Gross.
It's this room with like chains hanging from the ceiling, and he's just like, "Oh, this is really good."
Even the earlier scenes with two guys, Brett and Parker, working on the stuff down in the lower decks.
Oh, sure.
And there's smoke everywhere, and even beyond what you would think of as like visible steam or smoke, or there was always smoke on that set, and it just make it a little bit thicker atmosphere, so it just kind of looked a little creepier and more real in the case of like some of the models and stuff. And it was something the actors complained about. There was like constant smoke all the time, and they're just like, they would go home just like covered in this burnt paraffin residue.
Oh, God. Well, again, it's like that idea that this ship is not made for people to be on. Like, it feels like that's the reason that they get frozen. Like, in addition to it just being these huge journeys they have to go on, like, it feels like the entire Nostromo is built for a very specific purpose, and that purpose is mining. And so little of that is given over to the people, like basically the skeleton crew that's supposed to be running it.
Right. I mean, pretty much the only big space that they have is that area around the dining table.
Yeah.
Everything else is like they're in a little pod, or they're crammed into this tiny seat in the bridge, and It's barely made for people.
Yeah, for like a ship that big, there's no room for anything.
But, you know, getting back to that smoke, it's like, I love that when she's set to self-destruct and she sees the alien who is, you know, looking at the cat. They're having some sort of, you know, trading deal, I guess. And Sigourney runs off and goes and get the flamethrower that Dallas was trying to use on it earlier, which was like a real working flamethrower that they made for this thing. And like apparently the director and the cinematographer almost got toasted on one of the shots when Dallas came around the corner with his finger on the trigger. But I just love the quality of light there at the end, where it's just like, it's, you know, the strobe lights and klaxons and the big, you know, lights spinning around and the flamethrower, and it's that combination
there's that shot when she turns the corner and it's just there, right?
Yeah.
And just the way, like, the way it looks is just so cool.
Just the way it kind of crouched down. It's always in an odd position.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen pictures of the guy in the suit, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that thing, like, in those weird sort of crouched positions, it looks really weird.
Well, it looks like a guy in a suit.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the problem.
Like, that, the alien should not have good posture.
I think, and it was like this guy who they found, he was like a graphic arts student in London at the time, but he was Nigerian. This like guy who's like 7 feet tall and thin as a rail, and just amazing
sort of the
serendipity that they just kind of stumbled across this guy.
Yeah, like she sees the alien and she basically turns around to go shut the self-destruct off, and she finishes up. She's like 2 seconds late.
Yeah.
And I love, she's almost pleading with the computer. Like, Mother, I did it, I turned it off. Self-destruct in 5 minutes. Oh, you... I love that so much. It's like, oh, come on, what else can go wrong today?
I do love that. But then she does make it into the Narcissus to escape, and they have the nuclear explosion looking that goes off, which is, you know, it explodes like 3 times.
Yep.
But that's pretty amazing. This like explosion in space is kind of, you know, just thinking on like what nuclear explosions look like underwater and stuff. It was very much along those lines.
Is that sort of what they went by? That's really cool.
They didn't say that anywhere, but I'm just kind of like thinking of this documentary called Trinity and Beyond, the atomic bomb movie, and they have like tons of footage of like atomic tests and stuff. And
I've never seen that. I've never seen an atomic bomb underwater.
Yeah, pretty amazing footage in that.
I bet it would be. Yeah.
The interesting thing here too, in the commentary, Ridley said that. Ridley, my close personal friend, Ridley Scott.
Your good friend Ridley
said that that was like really the first time that people had really tried to like shake the camera a lot to make it look like there's some violent shaking going on in the ship or whatever.
Oh, nice.
I mean, we've seen bits of that before in Star Trek, but it's usually just kind of like move side to side, but it like actually kind of almost to the point where you're like hitting the camera, bang, 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 to kind of get that, you know, very fast motion.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that's him blowing smoke or if that's really. I mean, if that's
really
true, the first time
like,
people have done that.
If that's true, that's a huge influence on the way we shoot, like we shoot sci-fi movies now. I mean.
Right.
Like the new Battlestar Galactica was basically built around that sort of feeling of the camera actually being in real life.
Right, actually zooming in on stuff and it's not kind of that stayed composition from a single position all the time.
The idea that what's happening in the film is actually affecting the camera is a really cool concept.
And another thing that Ridley Scott said, apparently once she got in the Narcissus and was gone, that was actually going to be the end of the movie. And it was Ridley went to the producers and said, no, we need to do like a little epilogue here and, you know, give me another 4 days to shoot this.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, when she discovers that the alien is actually in the Narcissus with her and she has to, you know, get into the spacesuit and kind of maneuver around and try very quietly to to get the door open to, you know, blow him out into space. And I love that when she's doing that, she's kind of humming this. I don't know if it was like a real song.
It sounds like she's saying "You're lucky" over and
it's
over.
Like, you are my lucky star.
That's it. That's it.
It's like she's singing it to herself, to kind of calm herself down. I don't know if it was like a real song at that point, or if it was just something that she made up on the set. But I love that where she's like finally relaxing a little bit. Like, you know, she
it's been a weird week. Let's just.
And it's like, you know, the finally discovering that the alien is in there with her still is just kind of like the point where it's like, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I got to sing to myself to just kind of like, I'm going to distract myself from the fact that there's an alien over there. And I'm just going to concentrate on pushing these buttons over here and to, you know, get him out of there.
That, the reveal of the alien is also, it's so well done. I love the way the head blends in with those pipes that they have on the wall.
Oh yeah, it looks like that same kind of shiny black surface.
Yeah.
All the way through.
And then when it wakes up, like it does that thing where it sort of sticks its hand out, right? And you get that good look at the six-fingered hand, which I love.
I love that.
Just one more weird thing.
Yeah, something that Dan O'Bannon, I guess, has suggested to Giger to kind of add that on there. Mm. Where it's like you've got a second opposable thumb on the other side. Ooh. That's just creepy in and of itself. Where it's like, man, this creature is like super useful.
Yeah, can hold a pen with both sides of its hand. The perfect writing machine.
And she finally gets the buttons open to open the door out into space, so she can vent the air out and blow the alien, and you have to finally shoot him with a harpoon gun from some James Bond movie to actually push him out.
I borrowed this from Batman.
But I love that the last shots are when the alien finally gets outside and you see the shots from outside the ship. Yep. There's that full-size model of at least a good chunk of the ship that it was hung from the ceiling, so the engine ports are pointing down. And they actually like sprayed water out of the engine ports, and it's backlit with these like giant bright lights.
Oh, wow.
To make it look like, I don't know, some sort of plasma venting, something. Right. I love that it was just kind of like such a simple combination that looks really, really cool.
Oh, yeah. Also, I love that she actually has to sort of get it into the engine, because not even vacuum will kill it. Like, you just can't beat this thing.
No. Oh, we didn't even mention the acid blood.
Oh my god, of course we didn't. Oh.
Which is amazing. And that was something that Ron Shusett apparently came up with, because Dan O'Bannon was writing it, and he was like, I'm kind of stuck here, because why don't they just stab this thing or, you know, or, you know, somehow kill it? And they came up with that idea. It was like, well, what if it had acid for blood? And it's like, well, then you kind of can't kill it in a normal way. They can't just crush it or stab it or something. I guess trying to hit it with the flamethrower was what they came up with after that. But just even seeing that where they kind of had the face hugger and they cut into it and the acid spurts out and just eats a hole in the floor.
Eating through the hull.
And they had like a bit of flat styrofoam that they poured it was actually pretty corrosive fluid that they put on it. With like a couple of different types of acid and some stuff mixed up together, and it actually did, you know, eat through it.
That scene when they've been chasing the acid basically through the ship trying to stop it, right? And it sort of wears out on like the third or the fourth deck down, and Dallas borrows Brett's pen and sticks it in there, sort of moves it around, and it comes out all smoking. That looks so cool.
Yeah.
Really sort of simple way of showing what that stuff does.
Very, very effective, and gives them a reason for not being able to just kill it easily.
Well, and I love when they go to remove it the first time, and the tail tightens around Kane's neck. Mm-hmm. Like, that shouldn't, like, it's almost snake-like, and it's really cool.
Oh, yeah. And that was done so simply, too, with, like, you know, they kind of Vaselined it up and stuck a piano wire on one end of the tail and just pulled on it to tighten it around his neck. But the way they did it, it really looks like the alien is doing the tightening there.
Yeah.
Man, that's super creepy.
Ugh.
Well, thank you, Matt, for being
of course.
For a great discussion of Alien.
One of my favorite movies, one of the best horror flicks ever made.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. There's just so much that we wanted to cram in here, and I don't know even that we got all of it in with the 2-hour running time, but perhaps we should split these up into smaller podcasts. I don't know. Do you have feedback? Send it to feedback@opticalpodcast.com, or follow us on Twitter, Optical Podcast, or Facebook.com/opticalpodcast. See the show notes for this episode and daily posts of cool movie stuff at opticalpodcast.com. Special thanks to our guests, Ron Algar-Watt, Matt Robotham, Daren Dochterman, and Tom Schmidt for being on the show. Couldn't have done it without you. Al and Matt can be found at postatomichorror.com, and Tom Schmidt can be found at percolatedigital.tv. Theme music for The Optical and all of the interstitial music in this episode by Digital Drew, that you can find at digitaldrew.com. Our awesome The Optical logo by the inimitable Mike Gower. And last but not least, special thanks to CineFX Magazine for helping sponsor the podcast. If you've marveled over the effects in the hit film Gravity, like we did earlier, be sure to check out the current issue of CineFX, now available at cinefx.com. The new issue features a cover story on Gravity with 26 pages of in-depth, meticulously illustrated and researched coverage of the film's amazing journey to the big screen. It's also packed with details and exclusive imagery on the making of Ron Howard's thrilling Formula One racing biopic Rush, Thor: The Dark World, and the remake of the classic horror film Carrie. There's even more to wet your whistle in the enhanced iPad edition of CineFX available on iTunes. Prepare to be wowed by even more photos and breakdowns of effects shots, plus exciting video content and interactivity. It's CineFX on steroids. Visit cinefx.com for more information on all 3 editions of CineFX, print, online, and iPad. Thanks for listening.